Good afternoon. My name is Bob Workman. I'm the director at the Ulrich Museum of Art. And this evening we're celebrating our 40th anniversary at the Ulrich. So there's a 1974 theme, in case you wondered. I normally don't dress like this. Well, we have a very special treat. We've had a lot of exciting activities going on over the last several days. The Bridge Club's here, and we've been enjoying them in a variety of forms. And this afternoon, we're going to learn more about their context of performing arts, or performance arts. Amy Guise, our Curator of Education, will be giving the appropriate introductions, but I am going to thank all of our sponsors who made the exhibition and its associated programming possible. 40 Years, 40 Stories and its programming is generously supported by Mickey Armstrong, Joan S. Barron, Dr. Sam and Jackie Corey, Richard D. Smith and Sandra M. Langle, and the Fidelity Foundation. Additional supporters include Louise Barron, Norma Griever, Sonia Greteman and Chris Bruner, Eleanor and George Lucas, Jane C. McHugh, Dee and Mike Michaelis, Lee and Ron Starkle, Wichita State University, and the City of Wichita. So a good group of people joined together to make sure that we had the funds to be able to do some great things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Bob. So yes, welcome. We're getting ready to start off the evening. It could be a very memorable one according to the weatherman, or not. It is Kansas. As I reminded Annie, I wasn't sure if she remembered since she had left. As I mentioned for the artist talk on Thursday, these last few weeks have been a type of immersion into the performance art medium for many of us here at Wichita State University. From Shift Space annual fundraiser project Runaway, which features wearable art, to Harvester Arts guest artist George Ferrandi, many have been exploring this medium. And performance art may be a difficult kind of medium for some to wrap their head around. Friend Emma E. Hart, after Project Runaway, posted the following to Facebook. After being a part of a performance art piece last night, I finally get performance art. There's not always something to understand. It's more about creating an experience, an emotional, mind-blowing experience, and taking part in that yourself. It's about creating a completely unique moment in time that you get to claim forever. Well, this evening we get to take that mind-blowing experience a step further, beginning with Dr. Melinda Barlow, Associate Professor of Film Studies at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Dr. Barlow will provide us with some of that historical background on the medium, as well as placing the Bridge Club in context. Dr. Barlow is a film historian and curator who also researches the art of mentoring women. She is the editor of Mary Lucier, Art and Performance, and co-curator of Primal Scene, selections from the CU Art Museum's collection of photography from the 19th century to the present. She's received numerous teaching awards, as well as the Dorothy Martin Woman Faculty Award for her research on women artists and the Women Who Make a Difference Award from CU. In addition, she has received the Lynn Blumenthal Memorial Award in Video Criticism from the Video Data Bank in Chicago for her research on the early New York-based feminist multicultural performance collaborative, say that 10 times fast, Red, White, Yellow, and Black. She is currently writing a book on film art, female identity, and the process of collecting, titled My Museum, a memoir in art. Her essays on the Bridge Club will be published in the online journal Flow from the University of Texas at Austin and in an art catalog about the Bridge Club in the summer of 2014. Post-presentation, she'll lead us in a conversation with members of the Bridge Club, as well as accept questions from the audience. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with the Bridge Club, and many of you probably already do know these lovely ladies, they are a contemporary visual and performance arts collaborative. Annie Strader, Christine Owen, Emily Bivens, and Julie Wills each have their own significant individual practices, as well as their work within the group. The Bridge Club's interdisciplinary installations, video, live performance, and digital media works are site and context specific, and each work investigates specific local histories, populations, contexts, and stereotypes. Prestigious institutions have hosted Bridge Club performances, including the Museum of Contemporary Art Santa Barbara, Living Arts in Tulsa, and yes, Wichita's own River City Biennale. In support of their work, they have received the significant Artistic Innovations Grant from the Mid-America Arts Alliance, which includes support from the National Endowment for the Arts. After our conversation this evening, of course, we hope that you will all just rotate right on over to the museum where the festivities will kick off, and of course, there will be a performance from 7 to 9 p.m. With that, I give you Dr. Melinda Barlow.
Hi there. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a busy time of year. I thank you, Amy Guise, for choreographing everything down to the light switches so beautifully, for the Bridge Club for entrusting in me. So I hope to do you proud. Given the nature of the exhibition here, 40 years, 40 stories, and the fact that it's the 40th anniversary of the Ulrich, and it's also the 10th anniversary of the Bridge Club. I think that's a nice synchronicity, a nice double anniversary. Since both the exhibition and the collaborative are concerned with the art of storytelling, I've organized this talk as a series of interrelated stories. So I want to tell you a story of how I first came to experience the Bridge Club's work, which was just a little over a year ago in March of 2013 in Houston, Texas. My degrees are in film history. I began to work on an artist named Mary Lucier, who's a video installation artist who also was involved with this ephemeral medium of performance. And I became very interested in how you reconstruct a history of ephemeral objects or a history of ephemeral things like fleeting performances. That description that you provided, absolutely spot on from the person who said she finally got performance art. It's a mysterious, often set of actions or gestures or activities that are performed in space, over time. In the case of the Bridge Club, often there's this tremendous sense of ceremony, of ritual, a deepening of a sense of place, of your relationship to that place, and an annexing kind of the space where the activities occur. I knew this much when I went to Texas last year. I knew that the Bridge Club was interested in gender. I knew that they were interested in femininity, in the construction of female identity, in iconic images of female identity, in art and film and American culture. All of this was on the brain when I went there, but I didn't really know what I was going to, get myself into. I had seen some of their documentation, because this is the challenge. If you want to write about performances, you are often working from a trail of documentation that supplants the work once that ephemeral, fleeting, you had to be there kind of evening has come and gone. So I've experienced now 2 live Bridge Club performances, but I wrote a catalog essay about their work thanks to all of the documentation. Thank you, Matt Weedman of Artisan Photo, and my former student, for taking all of those pictures. I claim everything. He's a wonderful photographer. Look at these images. They've done more than 30 works. I cannot give you their entire history. I'm going to try to bring about 8 of them to life and give you a sort of bare bones structure of them, which they can fill in. You're welcome to ask any questions you'd like after the fact. But I want to start here. Right, this is one image that I find especially evocative and emblematic of the Bridge Club and how they work. 4 lovely, color-coordinated, matching outfits, day gloves, which have an aura and an air of another era, of propriety, of decorum, sense of anonymity, hidden faces. You don't know who they are. You don't know why they're there. You don't know why, if they wish they were here, why they're not here. and they always somehow seem to simultaneously be somewhere else. So who are they? Where are they? If they're not here, where are they? I don't know that I can tell you that all the time, but I can tell you where they've been. So here's what was on the brain when I was going to Texas. And I was very happy to be going to Texas. My father was a curator of ornithology. He studied birds. He was at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto for 35 years after going to KU in Lawrence, where I was born. So I'm glad to be talking about the BC in KS, because it's got a real personal connection for me. But I knew that everything was bigger in Texas. My dad was this, Illinois farm boy who loved cowboys, and he loved Texas. And we're convinced in my family, or my 4 siblings and I, that after he was in the reserves in Fort Davis in West Texas, he simply found a bird in that location that allowed him to go there for the rest of his life. So I'm thinking, I'm going to Texas, the land of my father, and these birds and cowboys and iconic masculinity. I get off the plane in Houston, and there's this giant statue. It's this 8 to 9 foot bronze of George H.W. Bush. And everyone is taking their pictures around this thing. I mean, if you go online, you'll see this. People posing, stuff over their shoulder. They're imitating George Bush. So everything's bigger in Texas. It's the land of iconic masculinity. The Bridge Club works on femininity. Okay? And I've never met them before. I know Annie, and of course I know Matt. But this is on the brain. They pick me up at the airport, and we just start dishing. We start talking. We start telling stories. They see my ring. I tell them it was my mom's. I say she was from Illinois. We keep going. We finally get to this hotel, which is the River Oaks Crown Plaza. In what I realized very quickly is the epicenter of cleavage in Houston, Texas. And we opened up the window, and Matt wasn't there, but I said, when is Matt coming? Because he just really has to do me a favor and take a picture of what's right outside my window. We go for nice curves and big headlights, texasdirectauto.com. And I'm thinking this is just too perfect to be true. It makes me think of the representation of women in all aspects of popular culture. Like, that famous phrase, what are they trying to sell, the woman or the car? Right? I mean, there it is right there. But look across the street. It was just like handed up to me. Those 3 icons of American consumer capitalism, Shell, Hooters, and IHOP. Right? Okay. But little did I know that I really was in the epicenter of cleavage, because behind this building with this big headlight sign was this, which is Twin Peaks, which is Hooters' biggest competitor, right? And they were celebrating something, I kid you not, this is a real thing. It was started by Wonder Bra in South Africa years ago, called National Cleavage Day. And this is late March, and they were about to celebrate this thing. Who knew that a sundae with 2 little dollops of whipped cream could suggest obviously what it suggests. But obviously, iconic masculinity, iconic femininity, the Bridge Club is working with this, and I have this association, and I think this is one of the interesting things about performance art, is it's so immediate, it's live, it's present, it's in the now, yet it can very often send you elsewhere through association. So I thought about the first time I went to Houston and to Huntsville to speak at Sam Houston State, where Annie Strader now teaches, and we had a wonderful day going thrifting. And Annie found this image on the left. She found a little photo book, and it's of another Texas icon of masculinity, the Texas Ranger statue, which is in Dallas, in Love Field, and greets everybody who gets off a plane at that particular airport. And it's so, period perfect. This thing was actually created by a woman, and it dates from 1961. And I love these 2 little Braniff stewardesses who are, perched at the base of this statue in their perfectly matching outfits, right? Looking up with tremendous reverence at this iconic Texas Ranger. Well, the trailer has gone from Colorado to Texas. The Bridge Club is in the process of refurbishing it, and if you've had a chance to see it, it's quite fascinating to me because it occupies a couple of centuries. Dates that particular trailer from 1969, but they've refurbished the interior, so it's got this Victorian feel. It's got this wonderful chandelier, and it's got an ornate tufted headboard, and it's got flocked fabric on the dinette set. They've built in a cabinet for plates. There are lots of collectibles in there. They're building up the paraphernalia, the trail of documentation, before the trailer has even had its inaugural debut. And what comes my way via email, thanks to Annie, is this image on the right, which is the Bridge Club in those dresses with the trailer at the base of yet another iconic image of Texas masculinity, Sam Houston, this statue that is outside of Huntsville. So they are clearly working this terrain of iconic images of masculinity and femininity. So here is the trailer from their lovely brochure. Annie modeling. There's that wonderful exterior, beloved interior with extremely beloved, especially yesterday. That taxidermed cat was a big hit. There's something very creepy about it. But this kind of cross-century feel, I think, is critical to their work, and their work as a kind of critique, both a celebration and critique of the construction of gendered identity. So I knew this much. I knew they had this website. I knew they were seeking stories. You can participate right now, today, tomorrow. If you can't go to a performance, if your friends can't go to a performance, they can go online, they can upload a JPEG, they can donate an image or an object and a story virtually that way. So I was thinking about this. I was thinking about Texas, my dad, birds, and I thought, I am participating in this because performance is all about that ephemeral interaction between performer and audience, right? So I thought, here's a souvenir of a past relationship that I need to let go. I'm going to give this bird up. I have a lot of birds. We all have a lot of birds in my family. I thought, this one I don't need. And I thought it would be nice to return it to Texas, to bury it in Texas, to give it flight in Texas, and let them do what they would with it in Texas. And then this performance began, called What Remains. So here's what happened. The Bridge Club, who always have these kind of matching or nearly matching outfits, often these day gloves, always with this look that's kind of vacant, a demeanor that's somewhat impassive, as Lisa, who is the director of the Shift Space, I've recently learned and teaches here at Wichita State, said to me as we were watching the performance yesterday, said they're kind of like clones. There's this thing about them that's sort of the self and other, the self and the multiple. There are many of them who are kind of the same person all at once. Okay, so they began to emerge from the Lawndale Art Gallery in Houston, Texas, and then emerge from the trailer. And one of them is taking notes and seems to be recording an activity and watching something that's out on the lawn. And where the Bridge Club members look, how their glances seem to look through you, how they seem to look through each other, but again, how they work in unison without saying a single word is a hypnotic thing to behold. And I look forward to doing it again tonight. So out comes this book and this set of notes that are taken. Out come a series of implements like garden tools, a trowel, a shovel. Okay. Hole digging begins on the lawn. Two of them are involved with this. Again, this is without saying anything. They're soiling those day gloves. The decorum of good behavior seems to be its own disguise. They're aware of each other. They're doing something. Out comes a teacup, like you saw yesterday if you were there, filled with water. Water is sprinkled on this hole. That's been dug. Soil is sampled and put into an envelope, returned to the trailer. Okay, and then out come a series of objects. But you don't know this when this begins. You don't know. The performance was, like yesterday's, to go on for a couple of hours. So an object was selected, and this was a ceramic bowl. It was placed inside this lovely little tea cozy. The second this thing came out like this, and it was, again, somber, solemn, full of ceremony, there was a kind of a ripple through the crowd because I wasn't the only one who had donated things to this trailer. There was this sensation of, oh no, like what is going to happen now? And as you can see, we've eliminated what in film we would call the match cut, right? We don't exactly see that shovel smashing down, but clearly this object has been smashed. It's a bull. It was a calf, perhaps it was a golden calf. There's something about this object and this ceremony and the destruction of it and the fact that the Bridge Club was soliciting objects and stories that were then taken in and one would think preserved, but in some cases destroyed, that created a very interesting tension, created a certain ambivalence. And I think, certainly for me, a flicker of recognition, like, I gave this thing up to them, the bird, but could I really let it go? What was it to let it go? And so, again, all the pieces were contained very carefully, ceremoniously. This is all about the gesture, put into the little sack, and then buried in the ground, gloves wiped off. So I was thinking about this because I'm interested in the process of collecting. I'm a small-scale art collector myself, and there's wonderful literature on this in the last 10 to 15 years. Not exclusively about women as collectors or women as the keepers of family legacy, but there certainly is a literature on that. I would highly recommend this book to you if you're interested in this stuff. Came out the very year the Bridge Club was formed, nice synchronicity in that, called Treasures, the stories women tell about the things they keep. And this was a book put out by two women, Kathleen Cairns and Iliane Silverman, one a psychologist, one an historian from the University of Calgary, and what they did was interview between 100 and 200 women ages 14 to 94. And these were, married, divorced, gay, straight, with children, without children, working, unemployed, cutting across every cultural boundary and line, and a book that's truly inclusive in the best sense of that word. And what they found out was that there was not one single woman that they interviewed who did not have a collection of something, who did not feel that she was in some way the keeper of her own legacy or her family's legacy. Often the women would say things like, well, no, I don't really have anything of value. And then out would come from under the bed one of these shoe boxes full of family photos, rings, rolling pins. Often what the women they interviewed had retained were objects and souvenirs about which triggered in them certain ambivalent feelings about their own feminine identity. Like there was one woman, for example, who had been married many times, and some people choose to throw out their wedding rings if they get divorced. Other people keep them in a box. And this one woman, apparently when they interviewed her, took out this box, opened it up, and then proceeded to try on the series of rings. And it was like trying on different parts of her life and different parts of herself. Right? I was thinking about this, about treasures, the Bridge Club, the soliciting of people's personal objects that are treasures. And then, of course, we had a post-performance adventure. I went with 3 of the members to, Houston is a center, an epicenter not only of cleavage but of collecting. We went to the Menil collection. And if you've been there, you know that one of the things that the Menils have an especially nice collection of is surrealist art. If you turn right, you go to the right, there's this lovely room after 4 exquisitely hung, my personal favorite, Joseph Cornell boxes and some Max Ernst collages. There's this room. It's called Witnesses to Surrealism. And in it are a lot of objects that the Menils collected that the surrealists were interested in. They were interested in other cultures, especially African cultures. They were interested in putting objects in kind of bizarre juxtapositions. And you can see that on the left at the back, there's a kind of alcove aglow. Right? In this alcove, there's a writing desk. On the brochure about this room at the Menil, this writing desk is not even mentioned. This was Dominique de Menil's writing desk, and it's filled with objects and toys and mementos and souvenirs that she kept for the children who would come to visit her house. And what you see in the drawers of this thing are the kinds of things that you see if you know the film To Kill a Mockingbird, in that wonderful opening sequence where Scout Finch is actually drawing a mockingbird. There's a pocket watch, there's some crayons, there are coins, as you can see here, marbles, a little flag, ribbon. These are things that have been put in the knothole of a tree for her by Boo Radley, who's played by Robert Duvall. So what you see in this desk is very akin to this particular cinematic image, and here's what you see. It's hard to see here, but in the box on the lower right, there's a little piece of paper that says the word lost, which I found very evocative. What is retained? What do we keep? What is a treasure? What does it mean to let it go? does it mean to preserve and or lose something? So that I knew, the Bridge Club is very involved with all of these issues. So I went back to research their entire body of work from that gigantic trail of documentation. So here are a few of my favorite works, each of them site-specific in their own way. This one done when they were still in graduate school, where they met in the ceramics program at the University of Colorado at Boulder, a piece called Pillows and Pantyhose, Ambush Decorating. Three of them here putting clay pillows on the porch of a house that in Boulder some people in the group have called the Coyote Poop House because coyotes, were taking liberties in it. It was that abandoned. This is kind of a rogue activity, putting these clay pillows on the porch of the abandoned house, stretching something associated with femininity across a porch that already has a no trespassing sign on it, right? And making a barrier of things associated with femininity. Now, apparently, I just started researching this place. I kept asking them last year, where is this on Arapahoe? Exactly where is this house? I live near this house. I want to walk by this house. I want to see what this house is. And I did a little digging, and I found out, this is the Bridge Club's great intuitive gift. They did this performance at a house that has now been is in the process of being restored by Historic Boulder. A woman by the name of Hannah Barker and her husband bought this house in 1873. The husband died, Ezra, in 1883, so this woman owned and ran this house. For 40 years, she was a civic leader in Boulder. She was a philanthropist. She was one of Boulder's first female teachers and a pioneer. This is what the house looked like in 1900, and by the time they did this performance in 2004, it had been abandoned for 25 years, but it's now on this kind of preservation list. So there's something very interesting about Boulder and that place that they've managed to activate in their performance. Why not go Wichita, right? Front window from 2008, something I have to imagine, although I was taken by the site where this piece was performed for. I'll go back to this. Center to Edge, the 2008 River City Biennial in Wichita. So in this case, the women wearing their wigs, which they always wear, and aid in the creation of this kind of anonymous collective persona that they inhabit together in each of their performances. 40 shorts, dancing, conferring, seen through a shop window on which has been inscribed the word sale, bringing to mind associations of, again, the selling of images of women. There are those mannequin heads in the window. Often their documentation will offer up exterior and interior views, like you see here, and often they are engaged with a site elsewhere. This particular performance was simultaneously projected at, I gather it's Fish House in Wichita, right, as part of this biennial. So engaging two separate spaces, one in body and one in projection at the same time. Tenants at Will from 2009. The women in sort of cat on a hot tin roof worthy, Elizabeth Taylor worthy slips and period clothing, temporarily occupied a hotel room in Knoxville, Tennessee as a part of a festival there, brought suitcases of objects and personal items with them, sometimes performing live in the hotel room, sometimes the hotel room was turned into a projected space of installation. There are more great shots on the website of this, of their phantom-like selves inhabiting the walls, the rooms of the room, the corners, the beds, only as specters. But here's where contextualization, I think, can become especially useful. The French artist Sophie Calle did a work in 2011, but this was a later iteration of a piece she'd been doing a number of versions of for about 10 years called Room. She came over from Paris with a suitcase full of personal mementos, a framed photograph of Freud, a couple of wedding dresses, one white and one red. There are other objects, as they say, that she sourced locally, like that burnt mattress that she found in an alley nearby. And apparently there was a taxidermed cat that was also a big hit in this particular room, although I could not find a shot of it for you online. Sometimes she was in there performing and in the room in the piece when people would come to visit it. On other occasions, the piece existed in the hotel room. And a hotel room is a transient space that you occupy only temporarily. So sometimes Callie was there, sometimes she wasn't. We look back at this. I also think a kind of aesthetic kin for the Bridge Club is someone like Cindy Sherman, especially in her untitled film stills from the late 70s. These are Sherman's earliest and probably best known works. Sherman is both all of the women that she creates in these photographs and none of them at the same time. Like the Bridge Club, she expertly chooses wigs, props, pieces of clothing, and there's a sense in which we might say the mise en scène, the composition within the frame, everything that she chooses, those things make the woman. The woman in the frame is not inherently anything. She is a construction that Sherman has made to make a comment on the various kinds of identities women might inhabit. Another favorite is Music Box from 2010. This was performed in the Off the Strip New Genres Festival in Las Vegas, Nevada. Again, an exterior space, an interior space, here a ruby-hued piano bar. The women in shift dresses with that, this is like an iconic picnic basket. My mom had one of these, right? I mean, there's something about these props that are very familiar, but the Bridge Club gives them new life by recontextualizing them elsewhere. Their dresses, I gather, were rigged with such that they exuded the sounds of music boxes. So they were musical in and of themselves. They moved inside to this piano bar where they sat separately and alone. Again, that kind of blank look on the face. That piano bar always reminds me of the Slow Club in David Lynch's film Blue Velvet. There's something of that era, there's something of that aura, that iconography, that palette that is Las Vegas. Medium, 2012, at Art Palace in Houston, Texas. 4 women on chairs on the wall, elevated up. One tearing pages from a book and dropping them down, another holding a teacup. There were projections on the wall of flying birds, dictionary definitions. When I saw this set of images for the first time, my first thought was, oh my God, that must have been exhausting, because I think this work always brings up for me the kind of a durational element of performance, and what the Bridge Club makes look easy is actually a very disciplined, kind of loosely choreographed set of activities that requires a lot of stamina. I look at that and I think, boy, my back would be hurting after sitting there for 2 hours. I feel that this piece is in the spirit with a piece that definitely was difficult to perform, Marina Abramovich's work from 1997, Luminosity, which was redone as part of her retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in 2010, a woman nude on a bicycle seat, holding this position for quite a length of time. This particular work concerned with the idea of the artist as medium, as transmitter, as a vessel. Inheritance, 2013, again, an art space that is evocative of an abandoned storefront, interior and exterior views. Here, the women are washing dishes in embroidered gloves. The dishes that they are washing, the cups that they are washing, are made of unfired porcelain, so that as they wash them and perform this most iconic and repetitive of feminine gestures and activities, the very stuff of housework, the dishes dissolve. Right? So you think of preserving, you think of cleaning, and the activity that they're engaged in destroys the thing that's been made. And there's, I think, with this particular piece, a real sense of how to place a lot of what the Bridge Club does in a wider framework. 1972 was the apex of the second wave of American feminism. It's the beginning of Ms. Magazine, right, and Gloria Steinem. It is the year that Ira Levin published the wonderful book, which is a critique of robotic housewifery, The Stepford Wives. It's also 1972. There are many, many works in this period, in film, both American and French and otherwise, also in video, which are about housework and about the labor of housework and about the invisible labor of housework and the mundanity of housework and how each gesture is a kind of unappreciated, banal task that a woman performs every day. This particular one by Chantal Ackerman, 1975, is called Jeanne Dielman. And this woman, to watch this film is its own act of endurance. It's 201 minutes long. And you watch Jeanne Dielman just cooking and cleaning, and here she's breading the veal, and it's just the camera just hangs there. It's completely static. And you have a sense for how bored she is and how vacant she is and how empty she is inside. She peels potatoes. She does all kinds of things until something happens to change everything. Now, there's this kind of vacant expression, and there's the Stepford Wives itself. Highly recommend the original, except no imitations, not that one with Nicole Kidman that happened many years later. But this, which came out in 1975, if you've seen the film, you know there's this strange moment early on when Joanna Eberhardt, who is the central Stepford wife that you hope will get out and she will remain herself and unrobotic, moves to her new house outside of New York City in the suburbs of, it seems to be Connecticut for the first time, and this woman kind of appears out of a pastoral vision holding a pot, with this, hi, speaking as though she's elsewhere. You watch the women performing these little tasks. The film is about, consumerism, female identity. It ends with Catherine Ross having been turned into a robot herself. I always feel when I see this final shot in the film, which shows that she can't escape having become a product herself, that it's almost an illustration of a famous thing that Betty Friedan said in The Feminine Mystique in 1963, which is that by the time the baby boom is come and gone, women have turned themselves into robots who have a kind of smiling, empty passivity. So there's a certain kind of emptiness that this film registers that was under critique from various feminist quarters in the 70s at that time. Video performance work, equally seminal. Martha Rosler, look at the expression on the face. Semiotics of the kitchen. And that top slide, this is kind of hard to see, but you can see the book on the top shelf says mother. Right, what this little video piece does is take every letter of the alphabet, and for every letter, Rosler has a kitchen implement, which she uses, and she has a single gesture. She's quite frightening with that knife when she stabs. You can imagine what she does with a nutcracker. She's really quite, it's a critique, and it's all played out against this very vacant face. And again, I think what the Bridge Club is doing is not identical to any of these things, but it's similar. There's a similar spirit of critique that comes out of this moment in American culture. Brings us back to Cindy Sherman and these untitled film stills. Often she would put herself in hotel rooms on beds, that vacuous expression. Where is she? Who is she? What's her story? What's her narrative? Lots of shots in the kitchen. And this is just a little bit later, which brings us back to Abramovich and the present and the film. The artist is present. And what Abramovich does in her performance is to be fully present for the people with whom and for whom she performs. If you know about this piece, you know that what she did was she created these three outfits, red, white, and blue. She tried to empty herself completely of any feeling, any affect, any sense of her own ego, which required a kind of constant daily training, Buddhist in orientation. At first, she sat across, and this was, these are full days for 3 months, like 7, 8, 9-hour days for 3 months in a row. She marks them off on the calendar. You see this in the film. For a while, she has a table between herself and the person who's sitting in front of her. After a while, she gets rid of the table, and the space of performance is even that much more charged. You see people cry. Sometimes she cries. Her face it holds a certain kind of vacant expression because she's trying to empty herself, and she's looking right at the person who she's watching, and in a sense to whom she's listening. So there's this kind of vacant expression, and I'm interested in the difference between that and this kind of vacant expression. The kind the Bridge Club holds very carefully, each member holds as she performs with all of the other members of the collaborative. Sometimes it's somewhat inquisitive, sometimes it's blasé. The members are always self-aware, aware of each other, sometimes when they're outside, attuned, listening. They're alone, yet together, asleep or awake, in projection, in empty rooms. Their identities obscured. They may be at the door. They're always on the road, on the go, always aglow, performing mysterious tasks, rituals in transfigured time. So that's all I got. I would like to invite them to be here, where they would be happy to answer your questions, to talk about works that I have mentioned, or perhaps others. I thought I would ask you, ladies, is there anything you'd like to say in particular after what I've said, or would you like to veer off on your own?
Thank you. Thank you.
See, it's good behavior. The guise of good behavior.
It's a guise.
Well, I have one thing that I can throw you, because I heard through the arts grapevine of Wichita that one thing that certain people were interested in was, the way you work together, both to put together a piece, and then that kind of wildly hypnotic, choreographed yet spontaneous way you work in unison with each particular piece. Like, how does that process work in each particular case? Maybe there's an example you'd like to draw upon from here, or take it wherever you will. No deferring. Someone has to talk.
Where to begin about that? So I think that's part of the reason that we do collaborate, is that when we met each other in graduate school, that when we started to work together to do this, we understood that there was a kind of magic that happened between us, and that was worth pursuing. So, and how to elaborate on that? I guess we set up some rules. I mean, the sort of base logistics about it is that we do set up some rules. We decide on rules amongst ourselves, and then we connect with each other. And we've been working together long enough that it becomes pretty natural, I think. I don't know. You want to add to that?
I would say too that as soon as we set up a paradigm or a set of rules that we kind of have established, that I think we're pretty keen on breaking those. And so there's some of that aspect that each performance definitely has some entities that are known, some entities that are familiar to us, but then, for example, in our last performance that we did in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Living Arts, that we actually broke one of our major rules, which was to actually make eye contact in a predatory fashion to at the audience. And so I think as much as some of those things seem very formulaic, that each piece is dealt with in sort of understanding of both how we function, but then also what the piece needs, or what the series of pieces need to fulfill what they can be.
And I think that being said, that also we are paying attention, we really pay attention to what the other person is doing, because there could be something that they do that is particularly beautiful in a spontaneous way that we realize, ooh, that's what we're going to pursue here. Yeah.
So, like
Yeah.
the event in Tulsa, was that planned then, or was it spontaneous?
No, it was planned. Yeah, it's certainly, before the performance, they're certainly planned.
Well, and maybe by saying we like to break those rules is that often we'll set up things and we intend to break them, right? So we'll set up something that starts to form a pattern or routine, and then when it becomes familiar, perhaps to the audience, then there's sort of there's something that comes in and breaks that repetition. So we intentionally plan that breaking.
It's a form of discomfort, or an appreciation
Violation.
of discomfort.
Had you planned to, you went in knowing you were going to break the gaze, like you were going to break that line? Can you describe how you did that? That interests me a lot. Kind of. Someone.
One of the things that worked really well about that is that we were there and that we had 3 performances, and so that worked well for us because we were able to establish on the first 2 nights that this is how we roll, right? This is what's going to happen. There's an expectation, so that when that was broken, it was very apparent that it was broken. And while most of the other, that only one member of us actually made contact, that the others seemed very much in their own world, and not to all people, but to one specific audience member at the time. And it's something that I think is interesting to us, to incorporate the audience. In a sense, at that moment, that audience member became part of the performance,
Right.
where everybody would then turn and look at the audience member and then back at me, like, what did you do to get that? You know? So that idea of implicating the audience, I think, is something that we've used before. We used it at that moment in a very specific way that is unlike how we actually function.
Actually, there's a quote that Melinda used in the essay that from Emily that said something to the effect of, we like violating people's expectations, which I thought was a good one.
But then everyone softened the blow of that by saying, like, to violate their expectations without breaking the audience's trust, which I think is a very interesting distinction. Because certainly when I was there and I'm thinking about that bird, you just wonder if your own object is going to come up next. But what was really most interesting is that it didn't come up. Like, that bird didn't come up. It was so much more interesting that you thought it could, but then out came something else. You know.
I think part of that in this particular project and with the trailer project is the engagement with the audience and asking them to contribute something, and what we do with that something, and that a lot of community engaged projects intend to have some sort of social impact. And that's not really what we're claiming to do so much as we're interested in people and places and how we can learn and develop and expand our work from that as well. And so there's something in that expectation that, you know, someone gives us something that that you don't know what we are going to do with it, that
That's
we're
right.
very interested in, that you are releasing something, that you're giving us something that we now have, or even a story you have. One of the stories that was contributed was used in the performance last night, and the contributor was there as well. And so sort of finding out, you know, like, did you know it was yours? Like, when did you sort of figure that part out? Because it wasn't direct, it was material based.
I think that's something also very interesting in the way the works lead audience members to have things revealed to them, to discover things for themselves. Right? There's another thing that I think Emily said, this one too, is that each work needs to have a bit of grit or friction. Right? There's a way in which it leads you towards something that's a bit discomforting, but it's never going to be, again, so radically so that you feel betrayed. You feel led someplace new, and the mind turns back on itself in this interesting revelation.
Well, the whole notion of the ritual, does that come from any kind of experience from you all personally? For a while, Barbara and I attended Episcopal Church, and part of it, quite honestly, was some of the same kind of vibe your works give it, of the creation, but yet the destruction, the aromas, and so forth. I mean, the decision to have the kind of setting that you present, does that come from any personal experience from any of you with church?
Well, I think generally for myself, no, not particularly from church. I think for other people, maybe more so. I'm really interested in everyday rituals and how ritual is performance, and that there is, and how all of those acts within various religions and practices are performative, right? And so that those things are that we're sort of playing with that and highlighting or analyzing those things within our performances. But I think that sort of that root of where they come from is something that I think a lot about, absolutely, and pay attention to when they overlap with things that exist in our culture and other cultures.
I think for all aspects of our work, there are things that resonate differently for each of us. And one of the things that we have to do as collaborators is acknowledge the overlapping space and the external space. So, any one of our works, if we were asked to talk about, what is the one most important idea, we would probably say 4 different things. We have, we sort of keep the collaboration in that shared space. And as the work has evolved over the last 10 years, we've developed a lot better understanding of where that shared space lies. Regardless of how each of us individually came to ritual or the shared interest in ritual, I think there's a shared piece that is interested in artistic practice as sort of a shamanistic thing, or and then gender comes in the same way there too. Like what is special or arcane to a certain population, artists or women or whoever that may be, and how do they come by that information, and maintaining for the audience the illusion that we have that, I think, is interesting.
I also think in terms of ritual, I found it interesting yesterday, especially to watch, and I mean, I've seen 2 live performances, but that was, I commented to you yesterday, that was just wonderful to have the kind of built-in art crowd of that, your Friday night with constant surges of people. And for a while, everyone stood back. There's this carving out of space that the trailer provides, and then the trailer, as I've said to you, serves as this very interesting lure. Like, people love that trailer, and they want to know in, and they kept asking me, would you think I could go in? I said, you can go in. You can definitely go in. You can go in and hang out. But, there's a way in which the performance carves out this kind of sacred space, this kind of sacrosanct space for a while, and nobody will cross that line. And then all of a sudden, there was this crowd in there hanging out, telling stories, and then there was a group of young girls kind of standing in the middle of the performance space, and one, jump over the rope that you're stretching out, but how that changed over the course of the performance, and what was sacred in the sense of you couldn't enter it at all became something that was open for people. I thought that was interesting, the way that worked.
But also watching some of those peering in, where does voyeurism?
Yeah. They love voyeurism. They want it.
We want to do it, and we want to have it done.
While looking hot.
With a dead squirrel of a wig.
That's a private joke.
Voyeurism has been a theme in a lot of our work, in a lot of different constructions, where we're inside looking out, where there's windows built so that you can only see pieces of our activities. When we did the talk the other day, we showed the one that's skinned in a translucent screen with video projection over the outside. You'd have to get really close to see what's happening inside, and then the person who's doing the looking shadow becomes a threatening figure in the scene for the rest of the audience members. So we're interested in the way that sort of voyeur, the one doing the watching, the one being watched, predator, prey, the way that these roles can shift back and forth. We do that in a lot of our works.
Satisfaction and denial. I hear you.
He
You want
gets
to
it.
join?
Yes, sir.
I've got a question for all of you about, I guess, from an art historian's point of view, and that is where your collaborative work together, where your collective, where the Bridge Club will fit art historically, and how it will be discussed. And I'm teasing this out as I think, so just work with me. I'm thinking about somebody like Felix Gonzalez-Torres, who's very much performance-oriented, but the way I talk about him in class is always like the picture of the candy in the corner, a YouTube video of someone interacting with it. And in some ways, it's that absence that propels the piece through art history and keeps things sort of on the surface so that they can be discussed. But, you know, during your presentation, the work was maybe about 20%, the visuals were 20%, 80% was kind of these narratives that get spun. And at some points, like, I thought I got it, and then at other points, I felt like I didn't. And that, like, art historically kind of made me think, well, how would I talk about their work art historically? How would they want it chronicled in a PowerPoint discussion about performance art? How would it be chronicled 30 years from now when they're older? 100 years from now when all of them are dead? Will, you know, do you envision other people being able to come in and redo these roles like Marina Abramovich has done? Where do you...
Those are a lot of questions there.
They are.
They're good questions.
They're very good
I'm
questions.
just curious about how you want, I guess at the end of it, I'm curious about how you want people to see your work and talk about it and how it fits in the continuum of art history. How do you all see it?
Well, I think the first part of that to kind of address is the aspect that, yeah, I mean, performance art historically, it's ephemeral. It should be ephemeral. It shouldn't exist. But the reality is that we need to document what we do. And I think for us, a surprising aspect of the practice was this documentation and how important it became and how it started to exist on its own. And so then these references occurred with Cindy Sherman, and that was right from the beginning. The work that we did had this cinematic quality to it, which we weren't really aware of until we saw the documentation of it. So I can speak to that part of it. That the documentation, but totally agree that the documentation is a small bit of it. It is a small bit of it.
Well, we would like to think there was a whole school of people following us.
I could also say the work of Melinda Barlow will keep us on the page. And
But maybe even, I mean, that's an interesting question that I'm not sure I can actually answer maybe, but more so that I think it'll be interesting to see maybe how our work also impacts others. I think it's lovely to see how we relate to other artists from art history as well as contemporary practitioners, as well as perhaps in 50 years what our work will have done as well. And I think that's exciting.
Well, and I think as you're teasing out the question from a really practical standpoint in the here and now, when you teach daily, we're teasing it out as we go as well. And, we're certainly not the only artists that are working between disciplines and facing very real practical challenges about how we market ourselves to arts venues or performing arts venues or nowhere, I mean, where this work exists and whether traditional, artistic institutional structures that we've grown up with are adequate for it, whether we want to challenge what that looks like, whether we want to find a new way of fitting within it. And, it'll be interesting to us to see how art history as a field shifts in the next 50 years too.
We know that.
I think it presents a real conundrum about the painting is there, you take a picture, you whack it on the PowerPoint slide. It's not the real thing, but
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm being grossly simplistic, but like, I wonder sometimes, like, what you would want the legitimate entry point to be into the work. Is it, is the still okay? Is it the still plus the story?
I think.
Is it the documentation and moving images?
I think it might be all of the above. And one of the things that also we acknowledge is that it's actually not the same. Sometimes it's, wildly different and more, palpable to see a gorgeous, image of it. And when they're actually in the moment, it's actually quite long and boring, and, that there's the complexity of the audience having to react or choose how long they're going to stay, or, that aspect of putting some of the responsibility on the moment itself becomes, I think, some of the power in that. And so that some of that is lost seems true, and that that in those situations we can't possibly expect any amount of documentation to replace the experience of being in the middle of a performance. And so that seems pretty exciting. That maybe what's exciting about it is maybe that it doesn't do that it can't deliver again, it delivers then.
Or it's also the experience. So coming from Dr. Barlow's experience, explaining her whole what moved her, what was her referencing. So maybe it's the documentation, but it's also a story of someone who experienced it. Possibly, I don't know. Of course, everybody has their own interpretation. So, yeah.
And what did you think of that interpretation?
I loved it. Well, we'd invited Melinda to write an essay on our work because we're really interested in her perspective, specifically. So yeah, we loved it, and we think that it's interesting to see how our work overlaps with filmmaking, with collecting, with contemporary art, with art history. I think that all of those different areas, that's sort of how we work. So it's nice to be sort of in between things.
And I feel that there are multiple overlapping contexts for their work, and I feel that whenever I've tried to work on something ephemeral, the story is, you can have a flat review of a piece in art form, or you can have a story that brings something to life, which is individual. It's a single vantage, but it can try to go out in multiple directions. And what that story, I think, hopefully, ideally, can give is, as I said initially, a sense of the atmosphere or the mood or the flavor, the feeling that was evoked in that unique experience that endured over time. Because with anything ephemeral, the documentation doesn't supplant the work, but as I said, there's this trail that if you're trying to reconstruct these things for posterity, you have to imagine yourself back in. And that's why I think their documentation is so resonant, because it gives you that imaginative springboard into an experience you might not have had. Or if you have had it, all you can try to do is very, I think, humbly evoke. And since this particular piece, the trailer, is about personal stories, and it's about objects that are, or the stories that are nested within objects, my own way of trying to come at it was just kind of try to kind of sort of widen the frame, and take us in. Did somebody else have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question about the relationship between the activity, the what you are performing, and who you are performing. Specifically, maybe comparing what you did yesterday to the piece where you were watching the Empire Porcelain, which I think is a very beautiful piece and had many overlaps with what you were doing yesterday. The relationship between your attire, who I assume you want me to think about who you are performing and what you're doing. The relationship there is maybe more parallel and easier to understand compared to what you were doing yesterday with the overall.
Those are jumpsuits, Levin.
So fancy.
That's a zip up.
Well, there's a certain amount of of research that we do for each project, and what we kind of feel like is right. And so I'll sort of maybe talk a little bit about the process, and then if somebody else wants to talk a little bit about the jumpsuits, but but we'll collect images to start with. Our process when we were getting started was trying to find things, you know, that coordinated, and we had a lower budget then too. But as we've been able to, we sort of get things tailored to fit us and made. And so we will collect images of things that we're interested in referencing and compile those, and then have something made from that we feel like fits the work.
Just an interesting side note, there was a question the other day about the sort of pervasive 40s, 50s character of the garments. And when Melinda was talking about the work that we did when we were last in Wichita with what you referred to as the 40s shorts, those were actually off the rack at Target that season. You know, so
who knew?
Yeah, we sort of managed to make things feel period.
And you're never sure quite what period.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
The jumpsuits,
ambiguous era.
The jumpsuits operated that way as well. When we actually had the jumpsuits made a fair bit ago and just started using them. We didn't quite have the right work until we wore them once before when we were in Tulsa just a little bit ago, and then last night. And they were a conscious effort to break up the dress, the formality of the dress and the primness. And once you get a wig and heels with them, anything feels a little bit prim, you know, and that flattering fit, you know. But is that addressed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a few things that, you know, as an aside, we're like, they're sort of like NASA work suits from the 70s. They're sort of like NASCAR road, like pit crew. But that sort of sense of utility that they evoke, right? That we were interested in.
And they seem linked to me to that first piece, pillows and pantyhose, your sort of mechanic outfit, and then your archiving outfits, which are sort of like right out of Alice, or some sort of 70s sitcom waitress. There are these costumes that function in a more utilitarian fashion, along with the super proper.
I think that there's a component of it that the work, when we're working in dresses, that we're still working, and so there's this sort of tension between the things that we're wearing and the work that we're doing, and so when we shift it to something like the jumpsuit, that one of the interesting things is how our work actually then seemed to in some ways fit very much and then not. And so sort of pulling on, again, that tension between what's expected and what actually happens. And so we showed a piece the other day that was shift work, and we're in these white dresses, and the action that we're doing is actually sipping or pouring this coal dust over our outfits, literally making the mark of it. And so clearly the action was not fitting of the outfit, but that was part of the tension that was interesting about it. And so I think when we're deciding on a costume, that at times it is to perpetuate an expectation, and sometimes it's to break it. And that's done in conjunction with the action or the activity. So thinking of those very much as two components of an equation that work in some way, either subtracting or adding to.
Great.
I have a question about the female ritual and the contextualization by Dr. Barlow, which I really enjoy, like for Martha Rosler, that comparison. And so that was her exploration semiotically, right, of the female ritual in the kitchen. And as you practice the similar, right, female ritual, I'm wondering if you guys have a different take. I think hers is very contextualized in a 1970s feminism sort of way, art historically speaking. And I was wondering what your approach or your feelings towards feminist or feminine ritual in comparison to that, and how maybe it's changed.
I'd say my answer to that right off the bat, which everyone may or may not agree with, but I think we can sort of say we operate this way, is very sort of third wave, fourth wave feminism, acknowledging our own complicity in these structures, in power structures, both historical and ongoing. And that's something that we're interested in sort of tweaking in directions that don't have a clear read to us as performers while we're doing them, or to the audience, that it sort of moves back and forth between do they want to be in this position? Is somebody keeping them in this position? Are they keeping one another in this position? That part feels very different to me from the approach of Martha Rosler and sort of 70s feminist work.
Yeah, I think that at this point, I think in our culture, that we're riding on the work, of course, that's been done in the past. And so I completely agree that the complicity that we see, that there is an awareness going on of perhaps of that work that was fought for. And I do think that by it's vague what our choices are. Did we choose to wear this dress that we can't really move in, but we have to do this action? And I think leaving those answers kind of vague, so that we're not. I don't feel like any of us is particularly righteous about that.
Okay, sometimes I can get up in everybody's business.
Minimalism for girls.
There are moments that are, but I do think that 10 years that we're I know this might be obvious to everybody, but we are in fact 10 years older than when we started, and
That just our wigs.
I am interested in the sort of aspect that I imagine that, doing this in 10 years from now is going to be very different than it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that I'm excited about the sort of responsive nature of our work, that rather than being sort of fixed, that it has an aspect that feels flexible and responsive. Target short shorts, zip up unisuit, but that's exciting to me. That some of those issues of ourselves, who we are at that moment, just seems really like a poignant part that would shift significantly.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that it's exciting. I mean, as we're aging too, I mean, the work changes, and so there's sort of points within each performance, within each project, that we think about how we can push it further, and try to sort of reevaluate what we're doing and how we're doing it, and that changes every year. So yeah, if we're working together in 10 years, where we'll be as women.
Stop with the F.
And all of that. And stop with the F. In 50 years, when we're still working together.
In 100 years, when we're still alive, okay? You don't know what's going to happen.
Cryogenics.
When we first started, somebody said, "Do you think people think that what you do they take it seriously because you're older?" and
that was 10 years ago.
And
so yes.
And every year we will say yes. A little bit more confidently.
Yeah, and probably be able to answer, to be able to place ourselves historically, to address questions of femininity, and I think that we're interested in presenting these ideas, presenting it, and just kind of putting it out there, like, have you thought about this or considered that? And I think, and I think that those ideas will just continue to kind of expand and contract as we move forward in our work.
Just real quickly, when you stopped by painting class on Thursday, you talked a little bit about, or you brought up a couple more guerrilla kind of actions that you've taken. You want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, what's the most spontaneous?
Last night in the hotel room. There was a little elevator performance. I don't know if I want to talk about it, but yeah.
What was going on there with those kind of pieces?
And what happened in the hotel?
Yeah. Don't you want to know?
We'll be reenacting it again tonight.
That's the performance.
Good stuff.
Do you want to?
No,
I think what we talked about in the painting studio the other day was with the trailer specifically and the archiving activities. Sorry, not the hotel room. Never mind.
Right.
That hasn't been the performative aspect. We haven't done a live performance in a setting where we were going to get kicked out. We have discussed doing so and very well may do so. There's a host of practical issues. But our early history was entirely performances that weren't sanctioned. So we did one on a city bus. We did one in a public laundromat that was sort of pseudo-sanctioned. We did get permission from the manager just beforehand, but
And we dried our clothes, which involved being a patron.
We did put coins in, but the entire clientele there did not know to expect a performance. Library, where we had to, surreptitiously change clothes in the back stacks without alerting the security personnel.
Not the first time that happened.
No, nor last. Didn't we do that at Shift Space yesterday?
Yes, we did. There's part of. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, there's part of some of that with the more recent guerrilla performances. When we were starting out, it was very much part of experimentation and figuring out what we even did and how that worked. But the more recent stuff that was guerrilla was, again, back to experimentation, figuring out how this project worked. With the trailer, we're interested in taking it to places that aren't necessarily art venues because it can go there. And what the responses are there vary greatly, and figuring out when we ask for permission and when we just go ahead and do it and get a slap on the wrist and leave when we're asked to leave.
We got booted off the Manil. We got booted off when we went to visit the Manil.
I love the RV park.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the RV park.
If you just pay your money, they're fine. but at the Fiesta parking lot, that was one that maybe not asking permission would have been more fruitful.
Fiesta's a grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think too, it comes down to that idea of the guerrilla. That in the beginning, I think we were doing it to figure out, how we worked, and then when we reapproached it, all of this time later, I think we're reapproaching it because we're looking for a different audience. We're looking for access to a different, set of input to our project, and so in that way, I think a lot of public work or work that talks about outreach, that they're talking about what they're going to give to a community. And sometimes I feel like I'm thinking, what am I going to get out of this community? I know that that's probably not going to get me a grant in there, but
it already has.
but that idea of being really interested in what this audience can contribute to this project, and then taking that and then pulling it forward into subsequent performances feels like necessary to change that audience or to really kind of meet that audience where they are. And so some of that guerrilla stuff has a really different kind of purpose or different initiation.
What that reminds me, when we were in Tulsa, we did a community workshop. And it was with a low-income population. And one thing that came up for us, which Melinda spoke to this a bit, where when we're collecting stories or objects, it's not linear. It's not that someone gives us something and we are going to tell that story. We're going to flip it. And what struck us is when we do the community workshop, as Emily said, we're really gaining, it's our research. And that what came up for us was some of those folks had been homeless. And so when they walked in that trailer, they were there. They were, when can I move in? This is fabulous. This is perfect. What kind of, and for us, and how this has changed, how this has merged into what we're doing is, I think in the performances that we're doing today and yesterday, and I think that this is accurate, is that we're thinking of it as shelter. It's shelter in a different way. And so that was a kind of interesting, unexpected thing that happened. Yeah.
Have a pause before they perform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for coming. Thanks.